Terry Stewart, you were Rutgers class of '69, Phi Chi chapter.
Yep.
Right? You came up from Mobile to go to college at Rutgers?
Daphne, Alabama.
Daphne, pardon me.
Yeah, please get that correct.
Yes, yes. I think you rode your motorcycle all the way up?
No, but I had a motorcycle. Yeah.
You did, okay.
Yeah,
All
in
right.
college, yeah.
Very good, all right. And Scott Simon, you and I were in college together, Gamma
That's right.
class of '76. You were 1 year ahead of me.
That's right.
Chapter president, and
Yes. Got to live in the house.
you lived in the house.
And I lived to tell about it, which is impressive.
You survived the whatever floats around in fraternity houses. I don't really know.
Yeah, well, yeah. Back then it was a lot of kegs of beer, as I recall.
That's your problem, Sam. I've talked about a lot that we had way more beer than anybody should ever have.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
That's what we had.
That's all we had,
That's
exactly.
right.
And we couldn't
That's
afford that much of
No,
it, so it didn't really.
We had to steal it from somebody.
It was the cheap stuff.
It was the cheap
oh,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, they'd be like, they'd give us a break if we bought 10 kegs. And we're like, but we don't have enough money for 10 kegs.
We lived off of Iron City.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know
because
Iron
I was
City?
president that 1 year, I got to live in the house.
Yeah.
And so I lived in the house, and then I had this brilliant idea to do the senior scholar program at Vanderbilt my senior year, which meant it was all independent research.
Wow.
So I was living in a fraternity house, and I didn't have to go to a single class.
Life is good.
I'm glad I graduated. It had the advantage of it was pass fail, so I locked in my GPA my junior year, so it was good.
Wow.
Good to get into law school.
Now, when we were in college, I don't know if you remember this, but there was, whenever a particular song would come on the jukebox or on the radio, you'd say, "The song's putting me through college." Do you remember what song I'm talking about?
Yeah, we had a couple of them, but at the time there was Elvis put out a version of "Always on My Mind," and that was playing. And then there was a pop country hit called "Rocky."
Yeah.
And Rocky was a #1 country record with Deke Lee, and Austin Roberts did a pop version that went around the world. And then there was a guy, Frank Farian, famous for starting Milli Vanilli, that won a Grammy and then had one taken away.
Yeah.
And so Frank was a sub-publisher in Germany, and he loved that song Rocky. He was trying to get it cut by different people, and nobody would cut it. And so he decided to cut it. So he cut it as an artist, and then another artist covered it as well. So there were two versions of the top 5 in Germany at the same time, produced by Frank Farian. So that was the one that was coming on a lot on the radio stations
Dickie
we
Lee,
would listen
Dickie Lee
to.
wrote that. One of the writers of that.
Well, the writer was a guy named Jay Stevens, one writer, and he was a local disc jockey in my hometown.
Oh.
And
Oh.
he'd pitched me songs, and I'd heard that song and gave it to my dad and said, "Man, I think this one's really good, like, of all the bad things you made me listen to." So my dad goes, "That is pretty good. I'm gonna slide that."
I remember that song.
Yeah.
But that's not what I was thinking of. Maybe I'm wrong about the details, but I thought you guys had a somewhat connection with the song "The Letter."
Ah, well, definitely the letter. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, of course. Yeah, my dad published The Letter by the Box Tops.
Yeah.
The biggest record ever recorded in Memphis, Tennessee, which is sort of crazy to believe. But that was written by Wayne Carson, a guy that worked with my dad for many years, and
Wrote a lot of great songs.
wrote a lot of great songs. And so what I would say was that our national anthem growing up was The Letter. So whenever it would play, we would stand up and salute. And then there was the Box Tops in '67, the Arbors in '68, and Joe Cocker in '69. So it was a hit like 3 years in a row.
I see. Okay.
And then Always on My Mind became a big record, so I said that's the one that put me through law school. So The Letter put me through college, and Always on My Mind put me through law school.
Can't beat that shit.
You went to law school as well. You went to law school after Rutgers, Cornell or something.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I think the best sort of event that happened out of I was president of the house too. I did. Now, did you get to live there that year because you were president?
Correct.
Is that the way it worked? Because we had a hard time. We had a big house, relatively speaking. That's it, and slept 40-something guys, and a bunch of us stayed there all years we were there. So it was sort of SOP. But I was also, besides being brother of Beta, I was the social chairman, and I got the bands.
Ah, ha, ha.
And we had no money, so if you found a band that people liked to dance to, those guys came back a lot. So we had a band called Link Cromwell and the Zoo, and Link Cromwell was a nom de plume, and Link Cromwell is actually a guy named Lenny Kaye. Lenny Kaye is Patti Smith's guitarist and has been since the day
Wow.
she walked into Bleecker Street Oldies shop, because he's a record collector too. And she knew she'd go in there and listen to doo-wop records with him, and she said, "You play the guitar, don't you? Can you make it sound like a train?" And Lenny said, "Sure." She said, "I'm gonna do a poetry reading down at St. Mark's," and can you go down there and play behind me? And that's sort of how it all started.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed in touch with him. I kind of made him an honorary Deke because he was there so much, but he's still playing with Patty. In fact, they've got tours scheduled this year. So that was our
That's
one
great.
brush with fame and rock and roll there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Tell us about your collections. I know you've got for a long time you've been collecting records and jukeboxes and what else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the above.
Well,
Everything.
I mentioned that my wife's not vaccinated yet because she's much younger, thank you Jesus, but she knows I'm going to croak ahead of her, and so she's been downsizing me since all 20 years we've been married. So the collections were everything. The records have always been the sort of centerpiece, and there's 200,000 or 300,000 records. Wow. And then there were 37 jukeboxes. We're down to 7. Neon clocks were down. There were 80. They're down to about 7 of those.
Mm-hmm.
Bakelite, these beautiful plastic radios from the 30s. Buster Brown, because I only wore Buster Brown shoes as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Coca-Cola, because I'm from the South.
Right.
Discos, posters, lots and lots and lots of posters and documents and contracts, and I'm having to move some of that stuff along now. And I had a guy just approach me the other day. I have a poster of the last tour that Eddie Cochran did in the UK. He died in a car accident in the UK, but in that poster it was him and Gene Vincent and a bunch of other Georgie fame who became famous during the British invasion. But Tony Sheridan, who was the lead singer for the Beatles for a minute and a half, and when they did some stuff on MGM, they all signed it. And so somebody's been trying to get that out of my collection for.
Right.
So people, if you're a collector, you try to keep these characters as far away as possible, or you make sure you got a good alarm system in your house that surrounds this stuff, because there's no honor amongst all this stuff. So
Right.
yeah, it's been an obsession. I got my first record when I was 2, and I saw my first live show in 1949,
Okay.
Eddie Arnold,
Yeah.
and I sang Big Bouquet of Roses with him because my mother wasn't watching me. I walked down, and then
Okay.
the only other person I ever met that ever knew that song. It's a great song, and he was on the radio every afternoon, and so I met him. He got honored by the Kennedy Center, and they have a dinner thing that's not part of the TV show, and I went in with a friend of mine, and he was sitting over in the corner by himself, and he looked a little bit like William Shatner, had this hamster on his head, this toupee, and nobody knew who he was, and he's just sitting there. And I went over and told him that he'd inspired me as a kid, and now around the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I did this, and I know better than to do this. You just don't do this. You do not, because most of these people, you have a very strong business relationship with these artists, but mine's about taking care of their stuff in a museum, and what do I talk to Eddie Arnold about except from personal, which is really always a difficult road to go down. I pour out my heart to him. He looks me right in the eyes the whole time, puts his hand on my shoulder, gives me that fatherly hug, and says, "Son, do you know what time supper is?" And I tell that story for people. Just when you ask me what you talk to people about, be careful. You can get that same kind of response.
Right.
I knew Eddie Arnold. My dad worked with Eddie Arnold. My dad produced the first big country music TV show, the Ozark Jubilee.
Yes, I read
And
that.
one of the spin-offs was the Eddie Arnold show. And so he had a few shows that didn't work, but my dad did one show with him, and it was a
that right?
successful TV show.
Well, I read about your dad a little bit, just backing up on you, and so he also had something to do with Brenda Lee, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And I have an Ozark Jubilee program with Brenda Lee.
I think I know which one. I think I know what it is. I think I know what that
You
looks
probably
like.
do, yeah.
Yeah, Brenda. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they signed her. Red Foley had heard her sing as a 10-year-old girl in Georgia, and called my dad and said, "We got to bring her to Springfield, Missouri, and put her on the Jubilee." So my dad moved her to Springfield and put her on the Jubilee, and then got her on Perry Como and 2 or 3 other shows. And so she's the only member of the Rockabilly Hall of Fame, Country Music Hall of Fame, and the Rock Hall of Fame.
Something like that, particularly for a woman. I mean, she's took forever to get her inducted because, like a lot of artists, once they've gone on for years and years, people have some vision that they're really, whatever pop is a bad word. It's a 4-letter word, but you spell it with 3. I mean, people use that just to distinguish that people don't belong in a certain place. And people don't understand that whether you're Brenda Lee or whether you're Connie Francis, these were rock and roll stars.
Right.
But you may say today they're kind of soft in what they sing, but there's no doubt, and you know it was a terrific battle to get her inducted.
Did she tour with the Beatles in Europe? I think,
Oh, yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Hmm.
So there you go.
Because that's one thing I did want to ask you about. I can only imagine what goes on when you try to figure out who gets in and who gets out. I mean, there's a nominating committee to the Hall of Fame, I mean.
It's nominated committee. Yeah.
Is it political or what is it? I mean.
I've heard lots of stories early on about what went on before there was really the same sort of committee. When I got there in the late 90s, there were about 50 or 60 of us, and we'd meet in New York, and you'd nominate, and you'd discuss why that person. And there was a bit of pushback in the room. You think it would be sort of like this ecumenical, but no, because people, no matter who you are, it's personalized, and there's always people in the room that have so strong opinions. And I will tell this story that one of them in the room was Phil Spector, and he was no to anybody, just about, and particularly if they ever worked with him, like the Ronettes or somebody like, even though he married one. So it was just the fact that you had an awful lot of critics. You have a lot of critics. You have some stars in there, but everybody personalizes the stuff. And you know, for things like progressive rock, really did not sit well with critics for whatever reason, and we had to form eventually subcommittees that would elevate certain acts. It didn't mean they got on the ballot, but we'd elevate them as being somebody that the subcommittee thought should be highlighted and looked at. And you know, acts like Rush, Genesis, things like that were really, you know, I used to nominate Kiss every year, and I got killed. I did a comic book with Kiss, and working with Gene is not always the best experience in the world, but he's brilliant, and he'd do anything if it's for him and Kiss. But you know, most of the room never saw it, and it wasn't, for instance, it wasn't until I retired and got off the committee that, as I understand it, I'd nominate him a lot of times. Joe Morello from Rage Against the Machine, he got a lot more juice than I did. So somebody like that nominates and stands behind him as a champion. And that's what I'd always tell people. If you think so-and-so really, if you believe in it, the only thing I can tell you is find a champion in that room. And there's no set list you can go find people and say, I'm going to find them, and if they are, you're not going to get to them anyway. So it was just more personal than it was political. It may have been some more politics at the beginning when it all started, when I'm sure the people who were involved, which was Amit and Jan and Krasnow from Elektra and all these people, they had their favorites, and they would probably do a lot to sort of push them forward. But I never saw any of the hanky-panky or anything like that people accuse of. I just saw people's personal preferences.
What about the CMAs? What goes on behind those decisions about who gets what award? You know, because that's a pretty big deal to win one of those awards.
It is. Well, there's the regular CMA Awards, and then there's the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So the Hall of Fame has a separate organization
Yeah.
now. They separated them out.
Yeah.
The CMA oversees the voting process, but then once that's determined who the winner is, it's sort of handed off to Kyle Young and Deke and the Country Music Hall of Fame, and then they go through the process of that. And there's a select panel of people that vote on it. I think they don't tell you who it is. Like you just have to run into somebody and they'd have to tell you, but most people don't because you're not supposed to. So it's it's more of a closed door process, vetted out. There's a committee that sort of submits to the voting panel, and the committee will go through that same kind of process where they'll debate and argue and position, and then ultimately it's narrowed down to like 10 people, and then to 5, and then eventually a candidate. And now they have 3 categories each year, so it's not just an artist, if you will. There's a modern category, a veterans category, an executive category. But honestly, I think if you look at country music, the Country Music Hall of Fame honor is the greatest honor that exists in country music. It's amazing. It's a select group.
Yep.
It's very difficult to get into. I don't see it changing, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that feel they had artists that they love that should have been in there that probably will not get recognized in the Hall of Fame. But
one of the differences I see is that the Rock Hall, when it started much later than Country Music Hall of Fame, and they tried to do a lot of catching up, so they inducted a lot of people the first few years.
right.
And by doing that, they sort of did a lot of the slam dunks early on, and then you had some. And now you're in this area where you look at the range of people that we induct. It's it's not as select, I would say, as I think the country music hall, because they've always been a little bit more precise
Right.
in how they've nominated and inducted people.
Yeah, I think, and look, I think there's a lot to be said for keeping the bar high. And there's some people. I think one of the things I think is sad is like some of the history of some of these older artists that maybe are deserving, but there's just not a knowledge base, even among the people that select, to really understand what that artist did and what they accomplished. And you can read it on a piece of paper, but it's not the same. This is sort of off the subject a little bit. But like I've always felt, my dad should be in the Country Music Hall of Fame. But my dad was a success from 1954 to 1980, and it's really hard to explain to somebody the impact of the Ozark Jubilee in 1954 on the world of country music.
Yeah.
So you had a format that was limited to rural audiences. Radio stations back then were not format specific, so they might play music half the day and they have talk and farm reports and all kinds of things. So it was television, and specifically the Ozark Jubilee, that took country music from the farms to the suburbs and the cities. And in fact, Webb Pierce, we were talking about Webb earlier, he became a big feature artist behind Red Foley on the Ozark Jubilee.
Was that right?
Yeah, he was like the second big star to sort of come in and be in the fold, if you will. But it's like, so I think that's an unparalleled achievement in country music. But there's not too many people around that can talk to you about the Ozark Jubilee.
Yeah.
And I just use it as a personal example. I know there's a number of artists that you look at and had remarkable careers, but no champion, nobody with that knowledge to advocate for them.
Change subjects a little bit. I'm always curious about how you find talent. I mean, are you to the point now where they come to you, or are you going out to bars on Friday nights and with sunglasses and listening to music and
You
trying to
definitely are
find the
channeling
next-
our days back at band. What are we doing on the weekend? Which bar are we going to? Is there a band?
That's right.
I used to go out and look a lot more. I don't do that as much. But even when we were at Vanderbilt, I remember going to writers' night, sort of that unique thing in Nashville where people are sitting there with a guitar and playing. And
Yeah.
I ran across Don Schlitz, and I was trying to get my dad to sign Don Schlitz as a writer because I saw him at a writers' night. Don went on to become a Hall of Fame member and wrote The Gambler and mucho hits. And he was also a part-time student at Vanderbilt, the Vanderbilt Computer Center. So, there was times when I was sort of in the mix of that. In fact, a Deke story, a fraternity brother of ours, Don Sherrill, and Don's parents wrote Crossing the Switchblade, which is a book that sold millions of copies. And so Don, I don't know if he was in my class or we'll have to remember.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Don said, hey, my brother wants to be a songwriter. Would you meet with him when he comes down here? So I remember meeting with his brother on the couch at the Deke house. His name was John Scott Sherrill. And I'd gone to my dad and said, I think I found another great writer. My dad was like, we're not signing anybody right now. I got plenty of writers. Take him over to Bob Beckham, who runs Combine Music. So I talked, I was a Vanderbilt student taking a Peabody course at Belmont. And so they had a recording studio. So the guy that ran the recording studio let me go in and cut demos on John Scott Sherrill. We cut some demos, and then he took them over to Combine, who got him an introduction over there, and they ended up signing John Scott Sherrill.
Wow.
And he went on to write many hits.
That's great.
So see, there is a deep connection there.
That's right.
But anymore, what I find is I get the best talent that I hear comes from other talent. It's just, they gravitate, they find each other.
Yeah.
Nashville's such an amazing town to network in anyway. So a lot of what I've heard over the years is, man, I just met with this person, you need to come check them out, or you need to go listen to this song or something. Very rare that it hasn't come through somebody else creative in the music industry. Pretty rare.
So if you're the young guy or girl trying to make it, then you just get to know other artists then, just network.
Oh,
with them.
absolutely. I totally encourage people to find your group, and it may be more than one group before you sort of figure out how it works for you. But You know, I think Nashville's closest like that. It's sort of our greatest asset and our biggest weakness. Like, it's hard to do anything in secret in Nashville, but it's also so many great opportunities to do things. So whether you're getting a demo done or putting on a show or just being around other like-minded people, it makes a huge difference.
You know, what's interesting to me is that I'll read about a country artist in Nashville, and suddenly they break, and then you read how long they've been here. It's interesting because it doesn't happen as often in rock music, I think, because it doesn't have a center of gravity like Nashville does, where these guys come here and they toil writing and playing, and they're determined to stay here, and they hang in there long enough till something sticks that they've been doing, and suddenly you read about them, and then you read the stories of how they moved here when they were 17 or 18, and
that's right. Yeah, may have come here, may have left, may have come back, and eventually found that thing that worked. Very much so. I say Nashville rewards persistence.
You were never involved in finding talent, that sort of thing, right? Or as CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
no.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
I'm like he said earlier, was the fact that I'm the guy that also would try to remind people of people they didn't know that they should know.
Yeah.
Connecting dots.
And to your point about older acts and acts that are, there's one guy on the committee with me, Seymour Stein. I don't know if you know Seymour.
I don't, but I certainly know.
And he
his name.
founded Sire Records, and he was a prodigy because he at 12 years old, he 13, 14, he worked at Billboard, or at the other one, not Billboard, but
Record World, maybe?
No,
Gavin, Cashbox.
Cashbox. He worked at Cashbox, and he then got a job at King Records in Cincinnati with Sid Nathan, and so he grew up in that business, and he founded Sire Records. He signed Madonna, Depeche Mode, the Ramones, but he loves older music. He loves vocal groups. He loves the R&B from the 50s and 40s, and there are some groups that were never. Some groups have been inducted, but some of the people and some of the artists that were so instrumental, and rock and roll doesn't start with Elvis and Little Richard. It starts long before that. The term goes back to 1923. And so all these records come out in the 40s called rock and roll, with rock and roll in the title, and these are all black artists. And those are a lot of the artists. Some of them have been recognized, but a lot haven't. And every year we push these guys, and we had a subcommittee that would push them. But it's so far removed from these people's sort of mindset that it's just almost impossible to get any traction on these people. You know.
How do you guys think the music industry has been changed or will be changed by COVID? I mean, what's it done to the music industry?
Bored the shit out of me right now. COVID has. I mean,
Yeah.
well, because you don't get to see music. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, you know.
Yeah.
We're calling it music. It's
Well,
being very liberal. with
well, again,
some
yeah,
stuff we're doing.
you may have a different opinion, but you know, to me, the problem is that virtual stuff does nothing for me. I mean, I'll watch some of it, but and I know it's a necessity, but there's no soul, there's no feedback. So I think a lot of it's, the main thing is that I'm hoping, and I'm still doing some stuff down in Arkansas with what I was working on, is that we're just praying that enough people get vaccinated, enough people have pent up demand to want to go back out and fill up the arenas and everything. I think that's going to happen. Now, how quickly it happens, I don't know. So, you know, I have a lot of people wanting to do virtual concerts for charity, and I haven't seen a lot of that makes a lot of money. I mean, and it usually still costs money to do it. So, I don't know. You probably have a better sense of where you think this is going to go.
Yeah, I certainly have some ideas. I think it's going to be a profound change on how we have a concert experience. I'll give you an example. I think it's going to be rare you're going to see a paper ticket anymore. We've been working that way anyway. Now why do you want to touch a ticket and pass a ticket along? So I think that just goes away really quickly post-COVID. I don't see showing up at a venue passing cash around. I think you're going to see do my elbow, whatever it is, whatever your form of payment is, it's going to happen. So you're going to see some technical structural things move forward, which some of that I think is really good for the industry. In terms of just the consumer demand, yeah, we're still a ways off. I think you've got to get people vaccinated, and it's going to be people. If you're sitting at home right now, and if you surveyed somebody and you said, "Do you want to go to a concert?" You're probably going to get about 100% of people say, "I want to go to a concert." and then say, okay, like, are you ready to do it now? 80% are going, I'm ready to do it now. And I can tell you there's shows on sale and nobody's buying tickets. So there's the yeah, I'm bored, I'm ready to go do anything, but when it's a personal choice, you're just, the comfort level's just not quite there. But you'll start to see that ramp up the end of this year, and I think next year we'll be back rocky. But you'll see some of these infrastructure changes that are probably really good for the long-term benefit of the industry.
There's nothing about the core of the industry or the way performances are done, like the infrastructure, yeah, but you think it's just a matter of time, and then, you know, live concerts will be back as strong as ever then. Once
Oh,
this thing-
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking about how things are done. It's like no artist got into the industry and stand in a booth 3 feet wide with the headphones on and stare at a microphone. I mean, they got into it to get out in front of people, generally speaking. There's a few that's not true for. But that's what they want to do, and they want that interaction and that back and forth, and that's what the audience wants it, and the artists want it. And no, I think we'll be back, and I think it will just continue to get bigger. It's just going to continue to grow. The demand for music, I've never seen the demand for music lessen in my life. How we monetize it and how we consume it, that's changing and will change constantly. But the demand is actually greater than it's ever been.
Yeah, but I think as a consumer, with all these new options that we have, that's increasing my demand for it. You know, I think it's more available, and so so what about subscription music? Is that I don't really get a good handle on it from an artist standpoint. Is that is subscription music or subscription services a benefit or a drawback?
I think it's going to be a benefit long term. It's proving to be a benefit. It's something that early on I was concerned about because you're sort of sharing across a broad audience that revenue. So it's not necessarily a world where Tim McGraw's getting paid more than a new artist. There's a little bit of, we're paying everybody a certain amount to sort of build this infrastructure. So I think you have some economic pressures there, but long term, it's better for all of us to have subscription active people. Trying to fight how people get music, this just proved to be a losing battle. So let people get music the way they want to get it, where they want to get it, give them plenty of choices, and then it's our job to monetize it and share it fairly. But I think, yeah, that we're not going back on that. That's the world to come.
Well, can I expect my serious charges to go up? I mean, it seems to me like it's so cheap to get music through.
I'm glad you feel that way, because I think a lot of people feel that way. I'm sure the people that built the infrastructure feel a little differently about it. But generally speaking, yeah, I think you're going to see it's going to go higher. You're going to have things where you have a family plan and somebody's paying for one membership and 4 people are using it. So eventually it's like, how do we monetize every individual consumer? And if you have a family plan, my guess is, do you have any kids?
Yeah, 2.
Okay. How old are they?
31 and 33.
All right.
Yeah.
So if they were on your family plan, my guess is that they would probably dwarf how much music you consume. And so let's say you have an 18-year-old girl, she's going to listen to Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber a hell of a lot more than you're going to listen to
the Eagles or
yeah, take your pick, right? And so I think we got to sort of figure that out. But ultimately, no, it's a good thing. It's gotten us out of the physical world, and we just have to continue to build it. I want those services to thrive. Do I want to get my fair share for the artists? Absolutely.
Well, that's where I was going to ask you
Yeah.
that question.
Yeah.
Are we going to see the royalties to finally?
Yeah, you're going to see them grow. It's going to be there'll be a constant pressure
Yeah.
and fight back, but we're already seeing it grow. I think you're going to see a world where rates are going to go up. You're going to see rates go up around the world, but we're plateauing a little bit in terms of how many people are signing up for services. I think a little bit of that is COVID related, because we're sitting there going, okay, we're all home. I can only consume so much of anything from my house. When people don't want to tune on the award shows. Do you really want to watch one more virtual concert? They're really virtual award shows for all practical matter. So I think once we get past that and we can get the creative back to where it needs to be, then I think you're going to see that continue to grow. But music's challenge will be just fighting for its time and attention. So ultimately, what does best for music is great music. it's just about great
Mhm.
music. They upload, I don't know how many songs to Spotify every day, and there's only a few that really matter. So it's still about going and doing the hard work of honing your craft and your vocals and your songs and figuring out where you're going to go. And those that do the best will succeed.
Yes.
I tell people, I think there's more good music than there ever was, but you don't have the clearinghouses the labels don't direct you solely to where the sources are so varied now. I mean, you can try to stay on top of stuff through iTunes or Spotify or whatever, and if you're not watching the cloud and all these characters that are putting their stuff up there every day and making audiences out of people around the world, and suddenly a label does find it. But I hear from my son, who's a musician, and everybody else, you haven't heard about it? So I go, no, where?
Yeah,
And I'm looking, but I
Right.
can't, it's just, there's too many places to look, and I'm not as hip and young as these people are, and they get into into the belly of the beast over and over again, the ones that
Mhm.
like music, so.
Mhm.
Yeah, the discovery process. Yeah, it's still intriguing, and it's going to continue to morph, and the companies will have to adapt to all of that. But I think it's a lot more what you just said, that people are able to go out and build a following and make some stuff happen, but they can only get so far without major record company support or other company support. And so now the companies sort of watch that. If they see something that looks really intriguing, then they jump in and can throw some gasoline on the fire.